This may come as a surprise to, well, no one, but I am a huge fan of both The Art of Puppetry and Jim Henson's incredible work. Whether it be Sesame Street, Muppets, Fraggle Rock, or Labyrinth, everything Jim Henson has had a hand in just fascinates me immensely. Perhaps one of the most notable films that Henson did was the now cult classic Dark Crystal, a film that, while greatly unappreciated at its time of release, is now loved and cherished by many. What Henson did with Dark Crystal was unlike any film before it, and even now it still stands out among the crowd. So being a Jim Henson fan, you could imagine my excitement when Netflix revealed that a 10-episode prequel to the Dark Crystal was in the works. Dark Crystal: Age of Resistance. And that's not to say I was without concern, as there were many things that could easily have gone wrong. I think I, like most people, don't really like the idea of prequels. For years, there were attempts to revive the Dark Crystal in some way, with talks of an animated series and even a sequel film. That sequel actually kinda did see the light of day, as it was turned into a comic titled The Power of the Dark Crystal, and for what I can tell, what was once going to be an animated series eventually became Age of Resistance. But back to the idea of prequels, I've always felt that a lot of times they're unnecessary, as they often come off as just a cash grab that's sole purpose is to answer questions that fans never had to begin with. And that's where Age of Resistance comes in. What could have easily been a completely unnecessary addition to Jim Henson's work instead became something truly special thanks to the amount of love and effort put into it. Age of Resistance never feels like it's living under the shadow of the original film. Instead, it feels like it's telling its very own story while further developing the mythology of the world of Thra. Dark Crystal is a film that's better remembered for its stunning visuals and its narrative. While I wholeheartedly love the film, I have to admit it's rather lackluster when it comes to story. Age of Resistance has the advantage of being a series rather than a single film, and the writers managed to take full advantage of that. The series narrative closely resembles that of an epic fantasy novel. The first episode starts off fairly simple with a mostly positive view of the world of Thra. It introduces our individual hero Gelflings and makes sure that the viewer has a general idea of their place in the world and their dreams and longings. Each of the Gelflings are somehow made aware of the dangers the creatures known as the Skeksis bring to Thra, and must embark on a quest to stop them from draining Gelfling essence. The original film focuses on Jen and Kira, the two remaining Gelfling, whereas Age of Resistance features several Gelflings, all from separate clans, whose paths will occasionally cross. This gives us the opportunity to learn more about the 7 clans of Gelflings, as well as see more of the landmarks and creatures that surround Thra. I'm so happy that Brian Froud was able to work on concept art for this series, as he is just as responsible as Jim Henson and Frank Oz for making the Dark Crystal what it is. I honestly have to remind myself that he's still alive sometimes, just because his art kind of invokes that feeling that what you're looking at is a classic that's centuries old. It's so much fun to see all of the new creature designs he is able to come up with, as well as how his style is conveyed into the set pieces. Everything we see feels perfectly natural within the world he's created. The puppetry itself is a stunning achievement. The attempt to replicate what Henson and the crew did with the 80s film, while utilizing new techniques not used in the original, must not have been an easy task. The vast majority of the show is practical, and while CG is sometimes used, it's used sparingly and in ways that make sense. But I also feel that the artists who did work on the CG deserve some credit too. Practical effects are clearly preferred when it comes to a project such as this, but without those VFX artists, a lot of scenes couldn't have been possible. The Skeksis are just as terrifying as ever, and those who worked on crafting the Gelflings had to find a way to make each one stand out. There are slight adjustments made to the Gelflings' faces that allow them to be more expressive than they were in the original. Jim Henson was an innovator, and while it's hard to know for sure what he'd think of a Dark Crystal prequel, he would likely have utilized all the tools at his disposal. It's also important to note that a lot of his family and friends were involved in this project, and I very much believe that he would have been proud of how they honored his vision. I highly suggest watching the documentary The Crystal Calls on Netflix, as it goes into details on how the show came to be. It made me appreciate a show I already loved even more. And while I do love this show's story, I cannot deny that it's still the visuals that make it what it is. I have no idea how much this series costs, but Netflix must have had a lot of faith in it, as they dumped a ton of money into it. The fact that we got 10 episodes of the show is pretty incredible. The cast also does an amazing job. There are so many talented celebrities involved here. Usually when celebrities are chosen as voice actors, it's simply because people will recognize the voice and you can drag in a larger demographic, but here a lot of these actors can actually voice act. Mark Hamill, of course, has been known for his voice acting in recent years, but the performance that stood out to me was Simon Pegg as the voice of the Chamberlain. I didn't even find out it was him until like the last 2 episodes.
All living things consume other things to survive. Not evil, natural.
There are a few changes made to the series, such as Mother Agra now being voiced by Donna Kimball.
Mystic ways don't work. Ogre ways don't work. Old ways don't work!
Finally, Age of Resistance is a prequel that's not afraid to get dark. Upon seeing the TV PG rating, I was a bit worried that they tried to tone things down a bit. Luckily they don't, as the show somehow manages to be somehow scarier and more disturbing than the first. I realize now that since they're using puppets, they're pretty much allowed to get away with this stuff and maintain their PG rating, so that's cool. Jim Henson himself said it's fine to scare kids, as making them believe they're always safe is probably unhealthier, and this show lives up to that philosophy. Overall, Dark Crystal Age of Resistance is a show I ended up loving more than I anticipated. Whether or not you'll enjoy it, I think greatly depends on whether or not you are already a fan of the original. If you haven't seen the original film, it's not entirely necessary to watch this show, as it is a prequel, but I don't know why you'd want to skip it. Both are currently on Netflix, so I'd say just watch them in whatever order you want. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all again sometime soon. Goodbye.